All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. So thank you to everyone who joined today for this webinar. It's going to be kind of introducing a set of variables or a set of survey measures which are included in a lot of the surveys that the Gateway utilizes, that HRS family of surveys, and kind of the variables that we've created out of that for you to use for your own research purposes. And Dr. Alexander Crosswell will be presenting as well as myself. You are welcome to interact with us during the webinar if you've signed on. So you can ask questions in the question and answer box. There's also a chat, so feel free to put any questions you have throughout it there, and then we will go through at the end, and there'll also be more time at the end for questions if you have some. Towards the end of the webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and we'll make the recording live available after this webinar, as well as we'll make the slides available and the data creation code that we use, or the data code that we use from the example analysis that I'll do towards the end of this webinar. And kind of our aim is that it should maybe run around somewhere between 40 minutes, and then with time for questions towards the end. So to begin with, I'll let Alexander start. I'm going to stop screen sharing so you can screen share.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to share with you this wonderful new resource. And I am going to share some slides where I'm going to talk to you about the availability of the well-being measures that we have harmonized. Okay. Great. Tristan, can you see my slides okay?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay, great. So I am here representing an NIH-funded emotional well-being network. The longer title for our network is Advancing Psychosocial and Behavioral Approaches to Improve Emotional Well-being. This is a collaboration between UCSF, where I am on faculty at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and Berkeley with the Greater Good Science Center. This is part of a large U24 grant mechanism where there have been 5 research networks that are funded to better understand and focus efforts towards improving the measurement and study of the broad topic of emotional well-being. We represent one of the networks, and today I'll be talking about one of the projects that we're working on in collaboration with Tristan and the group at the Gateway to Global Aging Data Project on the harmonization of well-being measures. Our team is led by Alyssa Eppel, Wendy Mendez, myself, Eric Prather, Laura Kubzanski, Dacher Keltner, Emiliana Simon-Thomas, and supported by one of our lab directors, Elena Fromer. We also have a scientific advisory board that is composed of leaders in the field. The aims of our larger network are first to characterize connections between emotion well-being and health span, to promote mechanistic emotional well-being intervention research, and to create and disseminate emotional well-being study resources. The project that I'm in charge of leading and working on in collaboration with Tristan is part of AIM 3, where we're working to create and disseminate more resources so that other scientists can study emotional well-being. As part of this broad array of resources we're creating, what I'm focusing on today is this first one in the upper quadrant, the Harmonized Dataset and Codebook. That's what I'll be focusing on today. But I also did want to let you know about the availability of other resources, including a measurement toolbox, an intervention library, and then training and summer institutes that we will be hosting. We launched this network about 9 months ago, and it's a 5-year-long project. If you're interested in this topic and staying abreast of what we're working on as a network, please visit our website where you can sign up for our listserv or just check on our news and announcements. And our website is emotionalwellbeing.org. Okay, to dive into this exciting project, I'm going to be talking about the Emotional Wellbeing Data Harmonization Project. The purpose is, through our long-standing collaboration with the Gateway to Global Aging Data Initiative, we will harmonize emotional well-being measures across 9 of the HRS, that's the Health and Retirement Study family of studies, and promote use of these data to test causal inference models, identify mediators linking emotional well-being to health, and conduct cross-national comparison. When we talk about promoting the use of data, we really want to push the fields to understand some of the causal inference processes that have yet to be tested. This includes identifying mediators that link emotional well-being to health in particular. We're interested in other aging outcomes and retirement outcomes, but our group in particular focuses on physical and mental health. And then to conduct cross-national comparisons, which is something that really hasn't been done in the well-being space thus far because of the limitation of existing data not being comparable. And that is what we are really tackling with this large harmonization project. When we talk about the HRS family of studies, it's important that, that you, as the viewers, understand what we're talking about. The Health and Retirement Study has a group of studies that are called sister studies, or this family of studies that are similar in design and in many of the measurement techniques that are employed. We're focusing on the subset of studies that you see here. So that includes MHOS, ELSA, SHARE, CRELIS, CLOSA, JSTAR, TILDA, Charles, and Lassie. The other important point that I make sure to make is, what do we even mean by emotional well-being? As I mentioned in the beginning, I am part of a single network, the Emotional Wellbeing Network with UCSF, Harvard, and Berkeley. There are 4 other networks of researchers across the country that are also focusing and funded through the same mechanism on well-being. That's called the Network of Networks. This network of networks has been working very hard over the past 9 months to figure out a working definition for the phrase emotional well-being. The call that the NIH put out for this U24 mechanism to focus on emotional well-being used the term emotional well-being, but there's many other terms that have been used in this space that you may have heard of. They include psychological well-being, subjective well-being, eudaimonic well-being, hedonic well-being. There's many different terms that are used to describe similar and also different measures that fall into this broad construct of positive mental health or positive wellness. So the working group has come up with a definition that may change. It's still a working definition, but it is the one that we're going with for now. And this is as of the date of August 13th. And this definition is: emotional well-being is a multidimensional composite that encompasses how an individual feels generally, in the moment, and about life overall. It has both experiential features, such as the emotional quality of everyday experiences, and reflective features, such as judgments about life satisfaction, sense of meaning, and ability to pursue goals that can include and extend beyond the self. These features occur in the context of culture, life circumstances, resources, and the life course. This, of course, is a really big definition. And it's hard to kind of wrap your head or your mind around what this really means. The key point that I want to emphasize here is the multidimensional composite component. There are different types of measures that fill into this construct of emotional well-being. 2 key examples are going to be a cognitive appraisal of your life circumstances, such as life satisfaction. And that is one of the measures that I'll be talking about in my presentation today. That is your cognitive evaluation when you look at your life of your life experience as a whole and how satisfied you are. So it's really a cognitive evaluation. When we talk in this definition about the experiential features, what we're really implying are the experiences of an emotion that you're having in this moment, or you can reflect on from earlier in the day. So it's an emotional experience, such as How sad did you feel? How happy did you feel? How joyful were you? When we look across the HRS families of studies, there's a multitude of types of well-being measures. When I look at trying to figure out, well, what measures exactly are similar across studies, that's where all the work is. Because at every wave of every study that we've listed, we had to review what measures were actually included and what were the exact items from those measures that were included. For my psychologist friends that are listening in, you might be confused. Well, why don't you just include all the measures and all of the items within those measures? Because that's what we tend to do in our small, highly select, kind of intensive psychology studies. But from the population science lens, as many of the population and data science researchers listening in know very well, you have to really be very concise when you're doing this kind of research. You can only have a few items to capture each different dimension, because we're trying to capture somebody's, basically their entire health history, their entire life experience in many different domains. And so these measures of well-being really need to be as short and concise as possible. So oftentimes individual items are selected from these individual measures and included. And those selected measures might vary between wave and between study. I'm presenting here just a list of examples of measures that exist in at least 2 of the studies that I had listed earlier in the HRS families of studies. So for example, life satisfaction, emotional states over the last 30 days, quality of life, job satisfaction, optimism, positive affect, which is positive mood. So all of these are examples of different well-being measures that are included in some of the studies. Driston and others have worked tirelessly to create a user guide that outlines exactly what measures are included at each wave of every study, what the phrasing of the items are, what the response scales are, and how they look when you lay them against the items from other studies. So if and when you decide to take advantage of the data that we're presenting today and the data sets, this will be a core component of what you will focus on learning about and reading and using as a guide, because it outlines all of the items available to you. This user guide is modeled after many other user guides that have been created by the G2 Aging or the Gateway to Global Aging team. So there's a certain format that this is in, and it's coupled with the data codebook, which is the actual variable names and the code for how the variables were created. So when you go to utilize this data, you'll download the actual data set with the harmonized variables, which I'll get into in a minute what those are. The user guide, which is more of a text-heavy written description of what you're seeing, and then the data codebook, which is the code and variable names to describe what you're looking at in your data set. When you're initially interested in working with this data, or if you have a research question around well-being that you're interested in exploring, I would say that this is probably a great place to start. You can read the text describing the project. You can understand what measures are available in which study. You can read the actual items to see if the items really get at the construct that you're most interested in. This is a great place to start. And once it's ready, it will be published on the Gateway to Global Aging website, as well as the Emotional Wellbeing Network website. And if you need it ahead of time because you want to get started now, you can email Driston. He will be the keeper of the latest copy of this user guide. To give an example of what is in this user guide, this is the table of contents. It includes an introduction, an executive summary and overview, and then an inventory and description of all of the different measures for all of the different studies. It also has helpful tables that can describe where there's overlap between the studies. What you're seeing right here is one attempt to break down the measures into different categories. So the initial authors of this guidebook used a previously utilized kind of dimensional framework to break down emotional well-being into different types of well-being. And here you can see that there are measures on evaluative well-being, hedonic well-being, eudaimonic well-being, and experience well-being. And I'll give you some examples of what that even means and what measures would fall under that category. These categories are up for debate in the field, just like the definition of emotional well-being is up for debate. These categories, some argue that they're really useful and very clear, and some argue that they're not useful because they're not clear about which measure would fill into which category, which you can probably make some assumptions on when I give you examples of what measures fall into these categories according to these authors. And just to call these authors, I need to be vague. Jackie Smith and Lindsay, one of her postdocs and who's now an assistant professor, and they've worked tirelessly on this project and have taken it really far. And I'm excited to kind of see the fruit of their hard work. Okay, so what is evaluative well-being measures? And I'm going to go through these 4 categories of well-being measures just to give you a sense of what we're talking about when we're talking about well-being. Evaluative measures of well-being include different versions of life satisfaction or quality of life. The word evaluative means that you are taking time to evaluate cognitively, kind of like I talked about in the beginning of my talk, to cognitively assess your life. So frequently used measures are the 5-item satisfaction with life scale developed by Ed Diener. This has been used for decades now. It can also be domain-specific life satisfaction, such as job satisfaction. That is included in multiple studies in this HRS families of studies. Hedonic well-being tends to be considered measures that assess global positive and negative feelings within the last 30 days, so really emotional experiences. And within this HRS families of studies, it's usually measured with either the PANAS, which asks during the past 30 days, to what degree did you feel? And then it gives you a set of emotion words: active, proud, scared, nervous. There's also the MIDAS affect questions that have been included in numerous studies, which the wording is slightly different. It says, how much did you feel X over the past 30 days? And the words that are plugged into that X are a little bit different than the PANAS: cheerful, in good spirits, nervous. Again, all of these specific items can be found in the user guide. Eudaimonic well-being measures, which sometimes are also referred to as psychological well-being, emphasize the role of psychological needs such as autonomy and self-actualization. One of the scales that can be classified as being under this eudaimonic well-being category is the quality of life scale, or the CASP. CASP stands for control, autonomy, pleasure, and self-realization, CAPS. And it assesses the quality of life in individuals. And it was initially created for this kind of early older age category. This also, or these categories also are measured in Carol Riff's psychological well-being scales, which include 6 different subscales that can be considered making up eudaimonic well-being. This is a hotly debated category because some people think that the psychological well-being scales don't all fall under the eudaimonic well-being category, and that should be considered its own thing that just means purpose and meaning in life. But Carol Riff's psychological well-being scales are in HRS and TILDA and include control, autonomy, self-realization, and 3 other categories as well. Finally, experienced well-being measures are also in the HRS families of studies. These are measures that focus on positive and negative emotions as individuals experience them over a very specific time frame, which is usually over one day. And they're expected to be fluid depending on the time frame. So you really want to be asking them numerous times in a row. Since 2012, there have been numerous measures of this experienced well-being that have been added into HRS, ELSA, Charles, Share, and Lassie. And these have to do really with the daily level assessments that have started to be included in these global population studies. Okay, now let's dive into an example of what we even mean when we are talking about harmonization. When we say harmonization, what we mean is we have concordance in some way across study and within item, so that we can harmonize and create one harmonized variable across all whatever studies we have it available for that represents the same item. So you would have one variable name and it would be the same item regardless of which study you're in. So this is a great example here. You can see that HRS, MHAS, ELSA, TILDA, and Lassie at a variety of different waves in those studies have these 5 items. They have each of the 5 items in them. And these items are, in most ways, my life is close to ideal, the condition of my life are excellent, I'm satisfied with my life, etc. So that seems pretty easy, right? Okay, you create a variable that represents, let's call it satisfaction with life 1, satisfaction with life 2, and those are your harmonized variables. And you could create a nice summary score and then compare across HRS, MHAS, ELSA, TILDA, and Lassie. That is best case scenario. Very few of our harmonized variables, not just in well-being, but in, for example, the stress harmonization project that I worked in, are this easy. Because oftentimes when you are working within a specific study, you might need to change the response scale in order to be congruent with the previous section that just came from it. Or if you're translating a certain item into a different language, you might have to change the wording of the item because in that language translation, it doesn't make sense to keep it the same way. So then the wording can shift. I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about next. Here is a single item life satisfaction question. Item is, please think about your life as a whole. How satisfied are you with it? Great, that item is included in HRS and Share. But what about these other studies? Is that item included in other studies? What if I just want this single item life satisfaction questionnaire because I have seen from previous research that this is associated with dramatic mortality or retirement or other health and aging outcomes? So then I look across MHAS, ELSA, and JSTAR and I see, oh, well, there's a very similar item in MHAS and ELSA. This item is, please say how much you agree or disagree with the following statement. I am satisfied with my life. So if you look at the wording of these 2 items, the wording is different, but the general question or item is asking the same thing. The construct is very similar. So can we harmonize that? Let's add even to the complexity of that. In JSTAR, it's neither of those 2 single items, but there's an additional one that says, are you satisfied or unsatisfied with your current life? So you can see here, it's now not asking how satisfied are you, or whether you agree or disagree with whether you're satisfied. It's asking whether you're satisfied or unsatisfied, which hasn't been brought into the other items. And it's asking you to focus on your current life versus the first item where it's asking you to look at your life as a whole. So this is where the work of harmonization comes in, where the leadership team of people involved in this emotional well-being harmonization project come together, sit around a table, now a Zoom screen, and debate and discuss whether these items are similar enough to be harmonizable. And if we agree that yes, indeed, they are harmonizable, Driston's team would create then one variable that's represented. We could call it new, single item last life satisfaction variable or whatever. The programmers come up with a much better coding system, but they'll come up with a new variable that represents this harmonized single item life satisfaction question. And then researchers would be able to compare HRS, MOS, ELSA, SHARE, and JSTAR on this single item life satisfaction question. If instead the committee decides that they're just too different, they don't represent the same construct because the wording is different and they are asking you to reflect on different timescales of your life, then these individual items would stay as individual items in the data set. This decision-making process is usually summarized in brief in the user guide so that users can know whether experts on emotional well-being agree that or disagree that these items can be compared. Eventually, what you'll be able to do is to go onto the Gateway to Global Aging website and select the data that you want to see and download, the harmonizable data. And that will include the emotional well-being measures, even broken down by category. And what I'm showing you here is what we've done for stress as an example. So for the stress data we've harmonized, you can now select if you want to see the data from the stressful life events, from the chronic burdens, or from job strain and discrimination. And then we'll be adding well-being. And you can look at and pull data from the life satisfaction measures or the job satisfaction or the experienced well-being. So this data will all be nicely categorized and easily accessible at the Gateway to Global Aging website. There's a great potential to use this harmonized data. So I wanted to talk about that a bit. First, the kind of most basic one is looking at differences in well-being exposures and impact by geography, culture, socio-demographic, resources, and demographic groups. And what this allows is really to understand the picture, the global picture of what these well-being measures look like across the world. If you're not interested in this kind of cross-cultural or cross-country comparison, it also allows us to increase our sample sizes, because if we have the harmonizable data, we can combine across data sets to answer questions about how well-being influences our aging outcomes over time. We can also replicate findings to see what is universal and what isn't when you have harmonized variables that you can look at. If you can't answer a specific research question in one data set, maybe the one that you have the most experience in, then you can look at another similar one. So one example might be if I work very closely in ELSA and I am interested in really understanding how some features of working life, maybe job satisfaction, influence retirement trajectories, but oh shoot, ELSA doesn't have any questions about job satisfaction. Instead of shifting my research question to saying, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll instead look at number of years of work post-retirement age. Instead, what I might be able to say is, oh, ELSA doesn't have job satisfaction, but TILDA does have job satisfaction. So let me now ask that same question using this new data set. So it kind of switches the way in which some population scientists might be able to ask and investigate, come up with a specific research question. Great. I hope that sparked some ideas for some of you out there. I wanted to share this announcement that the Emotional Wellbeing Network and the Stress Measurement Network currently, as of today, October 5th, 2021, because I know some of you are going to be viewing this post today's date, we have a request for proposals out, and that is due on November 5th of this year. And these are projects that are up to $15,000. The expectation is that probably most of them, since it's existing data, will be $5,000 to $7,000 projects that can pay for help with an analyst or conference travel. And this this request for proposals is looking for people who can take advantage and accomplish some of the goals that I've talked about throughout my presentation of utilizing some of this data. You would be one of the first people to access these harmonized variables. And this project would launch in February or March of 2022. If you have any questions, please email me about this, or if you have any ideas you want to run by me, I'd be happy to discuss it. My email is alexandra.crosswell@ucsf.edu. I also wanted to point you to a great resource. One of our collaborators on our emotional well-being network is Laura Kubzansky, who's at Harvard, and their group at the Center for Health and Happiness has created a well-being measurement repository. So if you're interested in reading just about what it even means to be measuring well-being, what are some broader examples of some of these measures before you dive too deeply into what's available in the HRS families of studies, I suggest going to this website. This is also a great resource if you are considering including well-being measures going forward in any studies or projects that you're working on. And with that, I will close. Thank you all for your attention.
Thanks, Alexandra. That was a great introduction to those well-being measures and why they're interesting. I'm going to provide a little more information just about the harmonized data sets and how to get access to them so that you can start to use these. And then I'll run through just a brief example of using some of these harmonized variables we've already created. So if you're unfamiliar with what the harmonized data means, so it means something a little specific for the Gateway to Global Aging data. And it's one of the things that we produce for the global research community. And they're kind of easy to use, user-friendly data sets. And they're created to provide comparable research-ready variables. And we make them for most of the HRS family of studies. I'll show you which ones they are a little later. But the harmonized data sets include variables which are defined as similarly as possible across all waves in studies. Each data set combines all available waves from each study, and each individual is one record, which means that it's a fat file or a very wide file. And this does mean that you don't have to worry about merging, for instance, HRS, the study here in the US has 14 waves of data. You don't have to merge all 14 together if you want to look at individuals who could have been included in any of those 14. Variables use an intuitive variable naming convention. For instance, a variable like R1 BMI is the respondent's BMI measured at wave 1. We also include study-specific variable names to indicate significant inter-study differences. So for instance, a variable called R1 LBRF_C is the respondents at wave 1, their labor force status, that's LBRF, and it's _C because it's specific to Charles, which is where you would find that data set. And Charles is the HRS sister study in China. And labor force patterns just look significantly different inside of China. So it's not possible to kind of make a one-to-one comparison of labor force categorizations between the US and China, but it's a really important variable. So we include it, but we include it with a study-specific variable name to indicate that it's not exactly comparable. We also include spouse versions of most variables, and the variables have been built to account for survey skip pattern or to account for other study differences, which we can kind of accommodate around. So in addition to these variables that we're talking about today, the well-being, I just wanted to show you the harmonized data sets have a lot of different types of variables. So you can see they have demographics, health, healthcare utilization, cognition, wealth, income, family, employment, retirement, pension, physical measures, assistance, stress, housing and environment, end-of-life planning, childhood, and psychosocial variable sections. And the psychosocial is where the variables that we're talking about today, these well-being variables, will be inside and are inside of that section, the ones we've already created. In addition to some other variables, for instance, like depression scales like CESD or EuroD, they're also included in that section. So the variables that are already available, and there's two variables that are already available, which is the satisfaction with life scale variables. And that was that example that Alexander showed you, which was really clean. It's 5 questions that are asked really similarly across a lot of studies. And that's already released for the Harmonized MHAS, that's Mexico, Harmonized ELSA, that's England, and Harmonized LASI, that's India. And we also have single item life satisfaction for MHAS, ELSA, SHARE, which is Europe plus Israel, and LASI, which is India. We're currently in the process of building out those 2 sets of variables for additional studies. So that includes the HRS, which is the US study, TILDA, the Irish study, and MARS, the Malaysian study. So those should be added generally, I think by the end of the year would be our goal to have those available. And then we have a host of additional scales that we plan to be adding. And you can see these here and kind of what data sets they're possibly in. And we're looking to Alexandra's group, the Emotional Wellbeing Network group, for advice exactly on how to create and harmonize these. But these will be coming over the next few years. And these are also something where if you're part of the emotional, if you get the grant for the emotional network analysis, and you're working with us, that we could kind of provide early access to some of these variables as they're created, which is something similar that we did with a similar call for stress analysis. So I want to show you just an example of harmonization specific to these well-being, and this is the single item life satisfaction questions. You can see on the left here, we have how HRS asked this question, which is think about your life as a whole. How satisfied are you with it? And then they gave the options of 1 to 5, completely satisfied, to not at all satisfied. And on the right, we have share, and they ask on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 means completely dissatisfied and 1 means completely satisfied. How satisfied are you with your life? And it ranges to 0 to 10. And what we want to make is one kind of single item life satisfaction variable, which we can compare. We could first make one with just a scale of 1 to 5, right? And that's exactly how HRS was asked, and other studies could ask this too. So we could create that, and that's quite simple. Of course, we can't create a 1 to 5 scale version of the share variable, but what we could do is make kind of a z-scored life satisfaction, where we take the scores from each and we z-score them. Because they're both ranging from satisfied to not at all satisfied or dissatisfied, the z-score will look at how the data are distributed, those values are distributed across the 2 different ranges in a way that can be comparable. So this is something that we've already done and created under the advice from Dr. Jackie Smith and Lindsay Ryan at the University of Michigan. This is one of those variables that's already available. All of the harmonized data sets are accompanied by a codebook, and this codebook introduces the project, it introduces the survey itself, it discusses weighting and imputation, and how we harmonize, and then we have different sections for each of the harmonized variables. You can see here is the summary for the life satisfaction variables. This is from Harmonized ELSA, the study inside of England. And you can see these are the z-scored values. So the mean is right at 0 for most of these. You can also see that we have respondent and spouse versions of this variable. The spouse versions are helpful because you could kind of instantly look at what the relationship is between the respondent and their spouse or partner without doing spouse matching. We have information about how it was constructed. So you can see here how this question was asked and how we coded these. You can also have information about cross-wave differences. So for instance, this question was not asked in wave 1 of ELSA. So that's interesting. And then we talk about differences with this data set's version, in this case, the Harmonized ELSA's version, and the HRS version of this variable. And so we mentioned here that in ELSA, it was asked their level of agreement with this statement, I'm satisfied with life. And given some options on a scale of 1 to 7. And then in HRS, it was, as we saw before, think about your life as a whole. And so it's really important that you kind of understand these differences, and these are documented in these harmonized code books. The last thing we do is we list all the variables from the originating data set that were used to create it. We also release the code that we use to create the data set itself. So you could check our code or look at it or modify it if you would like to create that variable somewhat differently than we have. And all of this is kind of in an effort to be transparent about the work that we do in providing these harmonized variables, because it's important for you to know, from the data that's released by the study, what's the extra work that's done in this harmonization process and what can I expect out of these variables. So the core harmonized data files which are currently available are the RAND HRS and Harmonized HRS. Harmonized HRS is a supplement to the RAND HRS dataset. The RAND HRS dataset is produced by the RAND Corporation, and my team at USC produces the Harmonized HRS. The Harmonized MHOS is Mexico. Harmonized ELSA is England. Harmonized SHARE is Europe and Israel. Harmonized Corellis is Costa Rica. Harmonized CLOSA is South Korea. Harmonized JSTAR is Japan. Harmonized Tilde is Ireland. Harmonized Charles is China. And harmonized Mars is Malaysia. You can see I've highlighted in yellow here those data sets which already have the satisfaction with life or single item life satisfaction question variables incorporated. Also here in orange, you can see the ones that will also have those two sets of variables available by the end of the year. Hopefully that's kind of the goal for those or shortly after. And then we'll be expanding that set of variables over the coming years also to those additional measures that we've talked about. To obtain the harmonized data sets, they're distributed either through the gateway or by the originating study. You can find this on the downloads page of the gateway, which is at the top of the gateway. And in some cases, the data files are created by users based on the code provided by the gateway. So in the case of SHARE, the European study, or CLOSA, the South Korean study, they do not distribute the harmonized data sets, but what we provide is the data code that you can use to create the data set based on the data they provide. So you have to just run this code once, and then you have the harmonized data set yourself. And we do have instructions and some videos on our site about how to do that. To be able to download these data sets, we do ask that you register on our website. This lets us keep track of who's using the data and how, and the registration is very simple. And we also ask that if you publish with analysis using data produced by the gateway, so using our harmonized data sets, or with information you found on the gateway, that you would just include the citation. This helps us keep track of who's using it and lets our funders know that this is a resource that people are finding helpful, and it is producing good research for the global community. So really briefly, I'm just going to do an example analysis so we could look at one of these sets of variables across two countries. So we're going to be looking at whether there's a relationship between age and life satisfaction, and is it the same across different countries? And in this case, we're going to look across two countries, England and Mexico. So we're going to be using data from the MHOS, the harmonized MHOS dataset, and the harmonized ELSA dataset. And then the kind of steps that we'll use is to identify relevant variables. We'll create some additional variables. We'll apply weights, and we'll analyze life satisfaction by age and life satisfaction by age and country. To download the harmonized MHOS, you just go to the MHOS website. You can also find a link to this on the Gateway downloads page. You'll have a link to be able to download it. It's very simple. It does just require registration with MHOS first, which is a mostly, I think, instantaneous process. But they also like to know who's using their data. And you can see here on the right, you would download the harmonized data file, and that's available in SPSS, Stata, and SAS. You can also download the harmonized ELSA dataset, and you do that from the UK data service, and it just requires that you register on the UK data service first. And again, this link is also on the downloads page of the Gateway to Global Aging data. So once we've done that, we're going to pick a year of interest. So I picked 2014. Picking this kind of like year of interest, I think it is often helpful to look at the gateway. For instance, if you started here on the gateway and you go to surveys at a glance, one of the things that you can see is when each study conducted their different waves. So you can see that MHAS conducted their fourth wave in 2014, so it's actually 2015. So we're going to be using wave 4 of ELSA, which is generally at the same time point of wave 4 of MHAS and wave 7 of ELSA. You can actually look into from this and look at the original study data yourself. And then from this harmonized MHAS data set, we're going to take some variables. We're not going to take the entire data set in this case. So we're going to keep the ID. We'll take a gender variable, an age at interview variable. We're going to be using the satisfaction with life scale score so that it's the mean score of those 5 questions that are asked as the satisfaction with life scale. We'll also make sure we include an analysis weight so we can produce estimates which are population representative, and we'll also include an indicator of whether the person participated in the interview. And you can kind of see here, again, our kind of variable naming conventions. So a lot of these have 4 in it because they represent wave 4. Things we don't expect to change over time, like gender, is just an RA as opposed to R4. From ELSA, we can also pick these variables: respondent ID, gender, age at interview, satisfaction with life scale, summary score, analysis weights, and indicator participated in interview at that wave, which is wave 7, as I mentioned. If you're wondering about how to find these, I'll provide kind of 2 suggestions. One is that as part of the gateway on the surveys at a glance tab, one thing that you can do is, for instance, we could say, I'd like the weight variables. We can go to sample weight or design, and we can say I'm interested in harmonized ELSA and harmonized MHAS. And we can actually just scroll and pick the year of 2014. And if we search using this, we're going to get these variables that we're interested in using. So this is R7 stratification and clustering variable. This is sample weight. And then if we click analysis weight here, we'll get those weights. So they both provide household and respondent level weights. For this analysis, we'll just use the respondent level weights. You can also check the harmonized codebooks that we released, as I mentioned. So this is the harmonized MHAS codebook, and you can see here those life satisfaction questions. And you can also kind of browse through, and for instance, we could go to age at interview, which is right here, which is provided in this R1 AGEY variable. And you can find out more information about that. So this kind of, these bookmarks are quite helpful to be able to find the variables that you're interested in. So once you've done this, you can load these variables into Stata. So you can load the harmonized MHAS observations and variables. So I just list those out. And then you can append in Stata, you can append the harmonized ELSA observations and variables. So we're just going to keep those variables, which we're going to use for this analysis instead of bringing it together. And we'll also make an indicator of what country they came from. Of course, we don't want to confuse observations from different studies. I'll do this quickly here inside of Stata. And you can see we can here tab our country variable. And you can see that we have 22,000 people from Mexico and 19,800 from England. And of course, these are people who participated at any one wave, these longitudinal studies. So sometimes they'll start interviewing someone and they're not able to continue interviewing with them. You also have people who will pass away. And studies also have what's called a refreshment sample. So they might want to continue having people in their survey who represent younger ages. They would add younger ages in. So this is across all waves. This is the number of individuals we have across these 2 studies. We can create some additional variables. And one thing that we'll do here is we'll adjust for the differing wave numbers. So if you noticed, the MHAS variables often have a 4 representing wave 4 for 2000 or for wave 4, which was 2015 MHAS survey, and wave 7 for ELSA, which was the 2014 ELSA wave. So we can kind of, for instance, we can make a new variable. So take our 2 age variables of R4 AGEY for MHAS, R7 AGEY for ELSA, and we'll kind of combine them into a new variable called R2014 AGEY. So we're going to make kind of stacked or comparable harmonized variables based on year and not wave number, since the wave numbers are study specific here. The other thing we can do is we can kind of break up this age variable into categories, which will kind of be helpful to simplify our analysis. And then we'll do the same for life satisfaction variables, our weight variable, we can do the same way, and our in-wave indicator, we can do the same way. So once those are created, which are created there, the next thing we want to do is apply weights. It's going to be quite simple in this case. As I mentioned, we created this combined analysis weight variable called R2004 WTRESP, or respondent weight. So we're going to apply that to both studies, but the weights are not made the same across both studies. And of course, one thing that we don't want to do is we assume that the weight that's given to a person inside the MHAS sample to represent the Mexican population is not necessarily comparable to the weight that's given to an ELSA respondent to make them representative of the English population. And we can tell Stata that we want to keep these kind of weight values separated by specifying a strata. And that strata will be the country levels. That's going to let Stata know that the weights are really relative inside each stratum here, which is defined by country. And so inside of Mexico and inside of ELSA, inside of Mexico and inside of England, excuse me. So in this next step, we could analyze life satisfaction for each country. We can estimate a life satisfaction score first for Mexico and then for England. In this last step, what we did is we used this command called SVY set. So basically what you do here is you just explain to Stata how your data is set up and weighted. And you can also specify clustering or other stratification in this step. And then every time that you write a command and you preface it with SVY, it's going to recall that information that you already told Stata. So if we do this now inside of Stata, you can see that when we estimate for Mexico, we get a mean score of 2.5. That's for everyone who was part of wave 4 of MHAS, which is 15,000 people who answered that question. And then for ELSA here, it's also 2.5. So they look very similar. And that's for 8,000 people. So a much smaller sample for that wave of ELSA. If we look at this graphically, life satisfaction scores can range from 0 to 3. You can see that life as a whole, people in both countries seem generally satisfied, which is a little bit striking in itself. I think you would imagine, because of the income level differences between these different countries, that you might expect quite different life satisfaction across countries. Probably Alexander knows much more about why that might not be true. And then something we can also do is we can test whether these country estimates are significantly different. And we can do that by estimating both country estimates in the same command. And we can do that by including an over option on our SVY mean, and then comparing the two different estimates for the countries across each other. So I'll do that quickly here inside of Stata. So you can see we get the same estimate from Mexico and England that we got before. And then we're gonna test, Stata will perform an adjusted wall test to see if there is a significant difference between them. And we basically find it's kind of, the difference is slightly significant, but depending on what p-value you want to cut it at, certainly not extremely different, which we can kind of see from the data also. As I mentioned, one of the things we want to do is we want to look across ages. Do people at younger ages, are they less or more satisfied with life as people get towards the end of life? Does their life satisfaction increase or decrease? You can do that by using the same SUI mean command, but instead of saying over a country, looking across countries, we can just say over age categories. So we're going to kind of, in this case, increase our sample size and look across both England and Mexico together. And when we do that, we can see that our number of observations is quite high. So it's 21,000 in this case. And one of the striking things you can see is that it doesn't look like it changes that much over these different age categories. If we look at this visually, you can see we're really staying around that that mean score of 2.5, generally from ages 50 to 85 and over, which is this last section, that last dot there. And then finally, just to wrap it up, I did think we could look at life satisfaction scores for each age category in each country. And this is quite an easy command to run. So you'll just take the previous command, and to that over option, you can add country and age category. And what that is going to do is this data is going to estimate for each country, each age category. So we get our age categories for Mexico and for England. And of course, if we look at that graphically, we can see that they really do look pretty similar. Interestingly, it does look like that at the younger ages of kind of like 50 to 59, we are seeing a slightly lower life satisfaction inside of England than we are in Mexico. It doesn't look entirely significant. But then it looks really comparable for these ages of 60 and older, basically, between England and Mexico. And we do see the same similar trajectory of it not changing a lot for people at different ages. So that's just kind of a quick example. Maybe you give me an idea of what you can do with it. We really, in this example, just looked at ages and country. You can, of course, incorporate more countries. We can incorporate India, using the harmonized Lassie data set into that to see if this kind of similar pattern is also true in India. And then we could also look at things like people's income level. Is that affecting their life satisfaction? Maybe having a spouse could be really determinative of your life satisfaction. Having children who are living around you or near you, maybe at older ages, that matters a lot. You could look at depression scales also. So there's a lot of really interesting analysis you can do out of this, which we hope this webinar has encouraged you to do. Again, I encourage you to visit us at g2aging.org, and you can email us at our help desk that we maintain, which is help@g2aging.org. So if you have questions about any of the harmonized data sets or the studies, that's a great place to ask. I would say if you have questions particularly about well-being measures or the call for the grants that the Emotional Stress Network are offering, I think Alexandra is the right person to reach out there. And also on the Gateway, we have our past webinars on our documentation tab, and that's where we'll put up the video and the slides and these data code that I used today. If you'd like to look at that yourself, will be on that documentation tab of the Gateway by tomorrow. And we also have some news and blogs that we kind of have listed there to give you more information about the studies, the data sets, different kinds of research that's being done, or different kinds of variables that are being created. So at this point, I think we can just answer questions. Thank you for hanging in there. We definitely ran a little longer than I imagined. But I think Alexandra and I are happy to answer any questions now.
Yeah, Tristan, we had a great question in the chat, and I think it's in reference to how do you really kind of make the case for wanting to take advantage of this harmonized data? So Penny Brennan asked whether there are any papers that kind of make the argument for why it's really useful to use harmonized data. Do you know of any?
Yes, there's a number of papers which have been put out, which are kind of test cases for the comparability and kind of the viability of this network and whether you can really harmonize across these different countries. I don't think that we have, I don't have them listed anywhere in particular on our website. I can, Penny, I will remember you, and I can certainly send you a couple of kind of baseline papers that give you that information. I'll also mention on the Gateway, we have kind of a publication catalog on there where people who have published using these data sets, we list their publications. And in there, you can see there's quite a number of papers that have utilized this HRS study of samples to do cross-country or comparative analyses. So in addition to having some kind of like baseline papers to kind of prove the viability of doing this kind of harmonized work and harmonized analysis, a lot of papers have already been put out and peer reviewed and well accepted and found to be interesting that are already using these kind of HRS family of studies comparisons. It looks like we also have a question. Maybe this is more for you, Alexandra. It's interesting that wealth is not considered part of well-being.
Yeah, it is interesting. Thank you for that question. And I think, part of Tristan's example analysis kind of touched on some of the complexity around assuming that objective measures of any kind of index of how somebody is doing in terms of wealth or accumulation of items or job status it's in itself a representation of their psychological assessment of where they are. So we're really coming from well-being as psychological and social scientists from understanding somebody's perception of how they are doing. And interestingly, there has been a significant amount of work, even several decades ago, of understanding that objective levels of wealth are potentially less relevant for outcomes than subjective experiences or perceptions of how they stand in society. And so people will now use a ladder that asks, on this ladder of how successful or wealthy you are compared to some group, and that could be the entire US or your country, that could be your neighborhood or your friends and peers, where do you rank yourself? And that seems to be more of an important predictor than some kind of objective measure of how much money do you have, for example. So yeah, great.
That's right.
Great
it's a
question.
great question. And that ladder is included. It's one of those that is included in this well-being user guide. And it is quite interesting to see how people answer that across different cultures. And Penny also, Preddy makes a good point towards Penny, which is if you are interested in understanding more about the aging process, I think GSA, which is the Gerontological Society of America, it's a great place to start. They do have their conferences all online now, and it's coming up. I think it's next month. I think it's in November. And that's a great place to attend and really find out more if you're new to aging research. To get an idea about what people are doing in the aging process overall. And there is one more question here, which is, this is again from Penny, do you have papers or recommended references, the use of analysis and sample weights in harmonized data sets? I think that the best place to look for those, Penny, is in these kind of webinars that we've done. And we've done a lot of kind of specialty ones. We've done ones that focused on longitudinal analysis. I think we've done ones for each of the data sets that we've worked on, or different kinds of analysis, life history analysis. So I would, on the Gateway website, I would look at the documentation, look at recent presentations, and you kind of have an index of those. Also, the code books themselves for each study do describe the weights and how you would use them. Or if you're interested in a particular content area, I think the user guides, like this well-being user guide that we're working on, now also give an idea about and how to compare these concepts or these different survey measures that are collected across studies.
And then finally, just if you're interested in knowing how to specifically reference something that you're finding on the Gateway to Global Aging website, definitely email Tristan.
Yeah, you're welcome to. Yes. Let's see, are there any other questions as we are finishing up here? Thank you for those questions so far. All right. Well, if there's not any more questions, again, if you think of something later, you're more than welcome to send me an email or Alexandra, depending on what it's about. We could help you in different ways. Or you could just email the Gateway Help Desk, which is help@g2aging.org. And that kind of gets farmed out to the whole team of people who work on the Gateway or these different content areas like well-being. Yeah, so thank you for your time today.
Thanks all. Thanks, Tristan.
So, bye.